Okay, yeah, you can start.
Okay, cool. So we'll start with the Python tutorial, and both the Python and Julia tutorial are uploaded on my GitHub, and I have linked the files to the Mini Astro Workshop GitHub page. So if you all could go there and clone both the tutorials, that would be great. Let me show you how to clone one tutorial, and then we can move ahead. So this is the Mini Astro. So this is the Mini Astro page, and if you go over here, day 2 Python tutorial, you will reach this web page with the ipynb file. Now all you have to do to clone it is copy path. Or you could have also forked it. I don't know where I kept the fork thing. Okay, let's just copy path and go ahead. Okay, so then you open your git bash, and wherever you want to store it, if you want to store it on the desktop, just create a folder over there, open the git bash over there, and just type git clone, and then right click. Do not do control plus V. Oh, 1 second, I didn't copy the path. Okay, so open on my GitHub page. That's why I think I can't see the path. um, Suri, can you help me? Where do I get that path of?
Yeah, so that I think you should go to the main branch itself.
Okay,
Like go to the
okay,
master.
Python tutorials. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yes. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Go to the Python tutorials thing, and then yeah, over here you get the path. Or you could have just forked from there. Sorry, I am used to the GUI. Mostly, I do not work with this CLI, but that is a good thing. Like, do work with the CLI. That's why I wanted to show over here. So yeah, wherever you want to clone the file, just make a folder over there and type git clone and then this path, and then press enter. It would be cloned over there. Do the same for Julia tutorial, and I'll give you 2 minutes because first I need you to run few commands on the Julia tutorial, and then we'll come back to Python tutorial because there are some importing commands in the Julia ipynb file which will take a lot of time to execute. So it's better we get them started and then we come back to our Python file. Let's wait 2 minutes for everyone to clone it, and I'll keep monitoring the chat also. Okay, I cannot see the chat from here. So Surendra, just tell me if people are facing problems in cloning both the files.
Yeah.
And
So one is asking what exactly mean by cloning. So maybe you can just say a few words about that.
okay, cloning is like both the tutorial files are uploaded on my GitHub page, and by doing that git clone, what you are essentially doing is downloading or just copying a version of that file to your remote desktop. So you'll have that file and an editable file with you on the desktop, and then you can open it with via Anaconda or Jupyter Notebook to run it on your workstation. So that is what I mean by cloning. Basically, if you don't like the semantics here, just type this command and just you'll see that the file is available with you and editable version is available with you. And that is only what I mean by clone. So basically, Git has this is a collaborative platform, right? So whatever code I upload, you can just fork that code with you, or just clone that code with you, and then you can work with it, and then you can provide me back the new version by a pull request, or you can just keep it with you and do stuff on your remote workspace. So that these are the functionalities that Git provides you.
So guys, if you check your chat, I've just copy pasted both the Git clones. So you can just copy paste those commands into your terminal and press enter, and some files will be downloaded, and you can open them using the Anaconda navigator that we installed yesterday, either through CLI or graphical interface.
Yeah, that's great, Suri. Yeah, both the commands are with them. Then you just need to open your Git bash or your terminal where you can log in into your Git and just type both these commands. If you're on Windows, you need to open your Git bash wherever you want, and if you're on your Ubuntu, just use the terminal to log in into Git and then do the Git clone.
No, since it's a public repository, right? They know
Okay, they don't need to log in then, right?
exactly.
You can just yeah, so on Ubuntu you can just run these two commands, git clone, the commands which Surendra has said. Cloning won't require, but if you want to place a pull request or a push, if you want to do a push, then you might need to log in.
Can you see the chat, Aman, or no?
No, I can't see the chat.
Okay, so Samyak asked this question. He got an error. Fatal destination path Julia tutorial already exists and is not an empty directory.
uh, let me check.
So Samyak, please make sure maybe you have already cloned the repository yesterday. So maybe you're trying to clone it again or something like that. So
No, that's not possible because I just
put
I
it.
don't know.
Okay,
It has
okay.
been 20 minutes only. I have uploaded this file.
Okay.
So push this file. So is everybody having problem in forking or cloning Julia? Is everybody having facing that problem?
No, no. Some people were able to download it. Yeah,
Okay.
some. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. Like, can you just repeat the error? It's fatal error.
Okay, he says it's all good. Okay, okay.
Okay.
Maybe.
Then that's okay. It's clone. Cool. Okay. So I hope by now everyone has cloned both the directories. Okay, I see. I can see the chat. Okay. So I hope everyone has cloned the directory by now, and uh, just you will have two IPYNB files. So a little introduction to you couldn't find the Python one, Atharv. Uh, so like Surendra has put up two git clones command, right? So is it giving any error to you while you are cloning, or you don't know the pathway? Okay, we'll see when he responds. So a little introduction to Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter stands for Julia, Python, and R. So you can have three languages run on this Jupyter Notebook. First, it was known as IPython Notebooks. these are very interactive notebooks. Okay, great, Atharva. So these are very interactive notebooks where you can run the code cell by cell, so you don't need to execute the whole code at once. You can run it cell by cell, and that helps a lot in such situations where I have to give some tutorial about some topics. And the cells run mostly independently. So if one gives out an error, that doesn't mean that the second one would also give an error unless the second one is connected to the first one via some variables or some other functions. But more or less they run very independently, so that helps. That also helps sometimes when we want to run two different parts of code quite independently. And so yeah, they have the extension .ipynb. So the the two folders which you would have downloaded must contain two .ipynb files. And I want you to use Anaconda to open both these .ipynb files. So how can you do that? Okay, let me just show you. When you open your Anaconda Navigator, you'll have something like this. You might have something a little different if you have a more advanced version, but the general interface should remain the same. And then you want to click on this, Launch Jupyter Notebook. Okay, when you launch your Jupyter Notebook, then you'll have something like this, an interface like this would open. Okay, and in that interface, so at the starting it opens something like this. Okay, and then I have to navigate from here, desktop, and then Python tutorial, and then the lab0.ipynb, which is our first Python tutorial. So you just click on this .ipynb file and it opens this Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so the path I showed over here, it's not necessary that the same path might be followed. You might have followed. So wherever you have downloaded, you have to search for it. I would recommend that you just shift your .ipynb files to your desktop, and then you can follow the path which I showed. Or else you can just, if you are smart, then you can find it and then. So this way the Python tutorial is open, and I should have my Julia tutorial also open somewhere. Okay, so you should have your Julia tutorial and Python tutorial open by now. Anyone having any problem? I'll just monitor the chat once. Anyone having any problem? Or if somebody needs more time, then you can just write in the chat. You can't hear me. Is everybody having the problem? Okay, so Keshav might want to check your system settings. Okay, so Keshav, you can check your own system settings because others are saying they can hear me. Samyak, keep both open, Julia and Python. First, we'll run the first two cells of Julia so that some packages are imported. And then we'll come back to the Python file and start with the Python tutorial.
Aman, there was a question. Prachuj is asking, I couldn't join yesterday. Is Anaconda, using Anaconda important, or even VS Code is also okay?
You just need to use Jupyter Notebook. So I don't have any experience on with VS Code, but if that allows you to open Jupyter Notebooks, well and great. Or else just download the .ipynb files and then run them using your terminal. If you're on Ubuntu, just run them using Python command. Run them later, not now. And for now, you can just follow me. I'll be executing the commands on the screen, so you can follow me and just ask questions and learn from there. And then you can run them later using the terminal also. .ipynb file can be run using the terminals. Jupyter Notebook is not a necessity, but it helps me demonstrate certain points. Okay, so Samyak, you should have in the prerequisite there was something iJulia and Julia. So if you download Julia using your Anaconda bash and then install iJulia, then Jupyter Notebook only gives you the option of having both the kernels. So if you see my screen, if I have changed kernel option, I have a Julia 1.1.1 version, Julia 1.3.1 version, and a Python 3 version. If people had problem in, okay, you haven't downloaded Julia, okay, okay, cool. So then you can just follow the tutorial and then later download it. I have provided the links, and just correspond with me whatever problems you are having if Julia is not getting installed properly. And others also can follow the same path, and if you have downloaded Julia, then I'll tell you to execute the first few cells. So how do you execute a cell? Just go on that cell, whether it's a text cell or a code cell. Jupyter Notebook has two types of cells. One is a text cell and the other is a code cell. So whether it's a text cell or a code cell, just go to that cell and press Shift Enter. Shift Enter executes that cell. What it does to text cell, like you can see, nothing much is happening with the text cell. Basically, when you edit a text cell, it will have such a view, but then when you press Shift Enter, it will have a final view like this. Then let's come to the first coding cell, code cell. So here there are some packages. I'll get to packages and libraries later. I just want you to execute this cell, and then move on and execute this cell using cell, and then we'll come back to it later. Come back to both these cells. What do they mean? Just execute them because they take a lot of time, and we won't have to wait later. Okay, so let me execute the chat. So see the chat. Okay. So Sayam, you have to also download iJulia to see Julia on your Jupyter Notebook. That you can go to Anaconda Bash and then download the iJulia by the path, by the way I had linked in the README file. I don't remember the command, but I would say that if you go to download iJulia now, it might take some time, so better follow through the lecture. Okay, so we'll be starting our tutorial officially now, and let's start with the Python tutorial. Okay, so this tutorial we'll be going over two very important and very widely used language, Python and Julia. This is not an extensive tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll just cover some basics. Those basics also, the details, the gory details can be looked into later as a self-reading, but the main bits and pieces needed for any numerical programming or general programming later. I'll try to provide those bits and pieces, and yeah, more specific questions can be addressed later. We'll try to go through data in this Python tutorial. We'll try to go through some data structure, some conditional programming, arrays, some functions, and plotting, how to plot values. And Julia would be a non-direct tutorial in that it is a more advanced tutorial where I'll be covering these basics, but through a example of a 1D wave equation. Okay, so let's start. There's some introduction about Python. These tutorials I have, the first tutorial is adapted from a bits course which I had done in my undergrad, and that tutorial was also in turn adapted from a tutorial of some university in US. I have linked both of those tutorials. So you have the file, you can go to the original tutorials and learn from there, or you can learn from my adapted version also. And it gives us some introduction about Python. This is some self-reading material, you can go through it. You just need to know that Python is a programming language, and we'll be using it to do some programming and do some coding. Okay, it's a high-level language. High-level language in the sense it encapsulates a lot of gory details, and we just have to write code which is very similar to pseudocode. What's pseudocode? Whenever we are given a task, like let's say we are given a task, make tea. So we are told to make a flow chart of that task. That okay, we'll take some water, we'll boil it, then we'll put tea leaves, and we'll wait for the water's color to change, and then we'll add milk and all that. So that is a flow chart. Okay, and that flowchart, when represented as some lines and some conditions, that becomes a pseudocode. So when the code is a like direct translation of the pseudocode, that is crudely a high level language. There's a more technical definition, you can go into it later. But if you see this quicksort definition, so quicksort is a function which helps us sort an array of elements. Now, an array of elements is basically a list of elements given to us, let's say 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I want to sort that list in increasing order. So okay, I said it in increasing order only. 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is increasing. So let's say I had to sort it in decreasing order. So it will be 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2. So from 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, the operation is sorting. And there are different types of sort, quick sort, merge sort. There are different algorithms. We won't get into that. And we won't get into quick sort algorithm also. But if you see this, this is a Python code implementing quicksort, and these are just, this code is just a bunch of lines. So that is the power of Python. The code is very similar to pseudocode, and like it's readable by a very like a lay person who doesn't know much coding also can read this and understand, okay, what is happening. So yeah, that is the power of Python. Okay, let's get into some data types. After data types, I'll take a 2-minute break for the Q&A. So what are data types? Basically, when we are dealing with these programming languages, we need some variables to store information. That information is then modified, acted upon in our code. And then again, we need other set of variables or the same set of variables to store the information. Now that set of variables, if you have some coding experience in C or Java or any other most of the programming languages, then in that you would have to specify the type of the variable, like int x equals to 0. That means x is an integer and it will store the value 0 in a location. Now that specification of variable type is not necessary in Python. What types of variables are there? There can be int, they can be float, they can be double float, and all those different type of there's boolean, other type of variables are there. But in Python, you don't need to specify it generally. And if I put x equals to 3 and just ask Python, okay, tell me the type, print x comma type x is, just print the variable x, whatever value it's storing, and then tell me the type of x. Then Python, without even me mentioning it's an integer, Python knows it's an integer. Let's say I make it, sorry. Let's say I make it 0.0. Then Python knows it's a class float. Float is a decimal. Floating point numbers are used to represent decimal numbers in computer programming. If you don't know about it, I'll suggest you read about it. Then there's some general operations you can do on the number. Let me change it back to int, because then it will be consistent. Okay, so I can add a number 1, I can subtract a number 1, I can multiply something, I can exponentiate. Exponentiate in the means raise it to a power. So double double is square, double double 2 is square. So my value was 3 and these operations can be performed on it. And then you can do this incrementation and decrement, increment and decrement operator can be applied. And then x multiplied equals to 2 means, one second, yeah, x multiplied equals to 2 means multiply x with 2 and then store the variable back in x. So these are some shorthands. We also know it from CP, general computer programming in C also. I'm not going into a lot of explanation for this because I think this should be general. But if anybody wants, I can revisit it if anybody says so during the Q&A session. Okay. So I just showed this for Python. Then there's another type, Boolean. Boolean is basically true, false, 0, 1. And you can just write true or false to specify what Boolean value it is. So Yeah, just keep on executing. If the cells are not executed, just keep on executing. So then there are some single bit operation and other operations also which we can perform. Their logical and arithmetic operations. So we saw arithmetic operations first, that is addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division. But there are logical operations also, like true and false will be false. True or false will be true. Not true will be false. True not equals to false is true. This is logical XOR. So these logical operations you can also implement. It's very basic. It's almost pseudocode. You just have to write in words and or not. Okay. Then there's another. Now we saw integer and float. There's another data type, strings. Strings are basically collection of words. Sorry, collection of letters. So if I want to, now remember, LHS is the name of the variable. Okay, this is a very confusing statement, but you need to make some distinctions. The LHS is the name of the variable. Like first we were putting the name as T or F or Y or X. Now I can name my variable. I don't need to name a variable X, A, B, C, D, E, F only. I can give it some proper name, and that is very much required also, because when you are writing long codes or writing a program, then your variable should have some meaningful name. And it's such a strong point that if you go to the IT sector or other sector, they have notations about naming, like this camel notation, and there's other notations which you have to use to name the variables. So be very particular about naming your variables, because when you come back to your code later, you should also be able to make sense of that code. So a variable with the name hello, and then this is the way you can like store the string. You can put the value you want in within single quotes or within double quotes. Let's say I do hello one. Okay, and then so you can see the hello variable now stores a string hello one, and the length of the hello variable is has also changed. So I would suggest you do all these modifications and also all sorts of gymnastics with this IPYNB file. It is with you now. You can do whatever you want with it and learn as much as you want. Then there's string concatenation. What is that? Basically, like we have 1 plus 2 equals to 3. If I have two words, hello and world, and I want to make it one string, hello world, then I concatenate the strings. So basically concatenating the string is also similar to addition in the arithmetic operations, where you do hello plus, give a space, then plus world. And then you store that whole thing in a variable HW and print it, you get hello world string. Okay. There's another method to concatenate the string. Just go through it. Most of this Python tutorial is a self-reading tutorial, like self-reading material, because it's very basic. And I, when I get to my Julia tutorial, that has a lot of advanced details. So that I'll try to go a little slowly. But I hope this space is comfortable for now. Okay. So again, another way you can concatenate the string and print it out. Okay, cool. So these are some functions available with some methods available with the string class. So generally HLLs have packages, libraries, or defined methods. These are codes which are used very oftenly in programming. Like I showed quicksort. Now every time I have to do a quicksort, I won't go and write the algorithm of quicksort again and then test it whether it's working fine or not, and all those things. What I do, I'll just import a library and a sort library, and then use the predefined quicksort, because I know that quicksort is working fine. It has been working fine for ages now, and it has no problems, and I don't need to waste my time again going over and writing the same algorithm. So commonly used functions or commonly used methods are defined in HLL packages, libraries, or classes, and that those methods we can use to make our life easier. But I would suggest that very complicated methods, try to write them on your own, because then you have a lot of uh, authority over the code, and then you can make necessary changes in the future when you want. A very high level encapsulation just gives you a lot of a very uh, let me frame it correctly. A very high level encapsulation will give you very less flexibility to perform the actions you want. Okay, so there's the, if you have a string, you can capitalize the whole string, or you can change it to uppercase. Capitalize is basically change the first word to capital, then you can make the whole string uppercase, and then you can right adjust it, you can center adjust it, and then replace some literals with some other set of literals, and all these things can be done. Okay, now these are the data types. Before I go to container, let me just see if there is any question in the chat. Okay, Mihir is asking, can I access Julia on Collab? Um, I have no idea. Like, I know you can access Jupyter notebooks on Collab, but as far as I know, Colab doesn't have a Julia kernel. Like, that is my knowledge, 1 year old knowledge. 1 year ago, I tried to access Julia on Colab and it didn't have a Julia kernel. So I don't think a Colab has a Julia kernel. Okay, Samyak is asking what is multi-paradigm. So multi-paradigm programming language is a programming language which supports more than one programming paradigm. So there's a lot of technical things I have to go into. Let's not. And to be honest, I don't understand it fully myself also. But the main thing I want you to go take from over here is that it's a high level language where you can use just literally sentences to code, and that helps a lot in readability. Yeah, that is what. Okay, what does it mean code once and run it anywhere? Could you tell me, like, what does it mean independent of operating system? Oh, okay, okay. So is this mentioned in my introduction? Let me just go there. I can't find it. But basically, what happens is when you compile a code, uh, okay, you asked it. Basically, I know it in case of, it's very common to explore this question in case of Java, where you have this Java kit, I guess, yes. So what does it do is when you compile your code, then you get a certain file and then you get an executable. So that compilation is done in such a way that it is operating system independent, that when you transfer the compiled code to one the other operating system, it can be run over there also without you accessing the high level file. Now this .ipynb is the high level code file. When you compile it, then you might get some other file and then you might get an executable. So there are different stages. And what does it mean that you can run it independent of operating system is that you can take a compiled version and then change your operating system but still run it. It's not dependent on the operating system. Okay, I hope that clears it up. So let's get to the containers. So now what are containers? Basically, when we are working, generally we don't work with just one variable or one piece of information. We work with a whole lot of information, like sets of pieces of information or lists of pieces of information. So that is what is a container. A container is just a collection of this information. So there are different way you can collect information. You can collect them in the form of lists, dictionaries, sets, and tuples. So I won't go into dictionaries because frankly I've never used dictionaries in my life. But the dictionaries part is still there in the tutorial. I would ask you to go through it yourself. I would go through lists because that is a significantly important container. And Then sets and tuples also I'll try to go through. Okay, because I have to save some time because my tutorial time is almost finishing. 15 minutes left. Okay, fine. List is basically a list of pieces of information. So it is just order wise collection of information, and then you can access each in piece of information at its particular position. Let's say there's a list with index 1 2 3 4 5, and then I want to access the element at index 4. So I can just access it using this list variable and a 2 in a square bracket, and that will give me, sorry, I said fourth, yeah, so fourth in a square bracket, and that will give me the element stored at the fourth index of the list. So here if I follow the code, I want to make a list of these three numbers, random numbers like 3 apples, 1 orange, 2 guava, and then I want to access the second element. So I'll just, first I print my whole list just for the sake of it, and then I access the second element, and then I access the minus one element. Now what is minus one? Minus one basically it starts the list from the end. So minus one is again this 2. So this is fairly simple. If you have done some basic computer programming, this is very similar to arrays in C or in Java, arrays. Okay. So this is different functionality. You can go through excess of 2 if I put a list. Yeah, so one thing is in Python, lists can contain different data types. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same data type list, because in C, if you define an array, you have to define int A or a string B. But in Python, lists can contain different types of element. Okay, you can add elements to the list. You can pop or remove elements from the list. All this thing can be done. Now let's say if you have a list and you only want to access a part of it. Let's say I have a list 0 1 2 3 4, and I only want to access this sub list. A small part of it is called a sub list, or only this sub list. So what would I do? I'll slice my list. And how do I slice my list? First, if I wanted to access only the second element, I would have just put a square bracket over here and just done with it. Okay, I want to access my second element, but now I want to access my second element and my third element. So what I'll do, 2 is to 4, not including 4. uh, 0 1 2, yes, 2 is to 4, not including 4, exclusive. So this is called slicing. So this helps you create a sublist from a list. Okay, there are different gymnastics again which can be done from this slicing. Uh, List comprehensions. I would just ask you to go through. It's not really some big thing. It's basically just operations you can do on the elements of the list in a very concise way. I would want to go through this code. So let's say if I create a nums array 0 1 2 3 4, and then I want to square each element of the array. What I would do is I'll make a empty list. This is the command to make an empty list, and then I'll loop over the nums array, nums list. So looping is a very important aspect of programming, where you, if you want to work on a list, array, or dictionary, or any kind of data structure, looping helps you to iteratively go over the elements and then perform operations on the element as your algorithm specifies. So this specifically is called a for loop. Over here, it's basically English for x in nums. Just for every element in nums, append the element in squares, and that element should be the exponentiated square power of x. Very easy to understand Python. That's why it's like very similar to pseudocode. So this will give me a squares list containing the square of the elements in the nums array. Okay, you can go through list comprehensions and dictionary. Never used dictionary, never cared about it. So, but it's good to know about it because it gives us a ordered key and item pair. So you have items stored in it, and then those items referenced by some key. Okay, sets is basically collection of objects, no order, no nothing, just a collection. And let's say I have an animals set, so it has cat, dog, strings of strings. It has two strings, one string is cat and one string is dog. So print cat in animals, it is just asking whether cat is in animals set, and if it is, it will say yes. If it is no, if it will say false. Okay, I can add elements to my set. I can remove elements from my set. I can loop over a set again using the for loop. And yeah, there's set comprehensions. And I won't go over tuples. Tuples is basically uh, like a ordered list of values. So you have some collection, and that collection is again ordered set of collections, and that is a ordered set. Basically, that is tuple. Very rarely, I have never used tuple, but in case you get to use a tuple, here's a good short introduction to that. Let's go ahead and okay, I went over loops. Okay, before conditional programming, let me check the chat. Okay, Divyanshu, we are using Jupyter Notebook because, as you can see, I can just uh, execute the cell I want to execute. I don't need to execute this whole, this is a huge code. I don't need to execute the whole code and then go through a sea of result, because each cell is giving a different result. So there are so many results. If you just take this .ibyNB file and run it in the this command line, then what you will get is a lot of result, and somewhere if there's one fault, the whole code stops executing or even compiling. So that is why we don't for this tutorial I am using Jupyter, but you can obviously use CLI also. Okay. So, Varsha, no, the sets are not mutable, and that's a really nice question. I think you come from Java background, but yeah, mutability is a very big issue in object-oriented programming, as far as I remember. So yeah, set tuples are not mutable. Okay, you are asking sets are mutable. So yeah, sets are mutable because you can add and remove elements from set. So yeah, sets are mutable. And but if you want to like replace cat as cats, I guess then you have to remove cat and then add cats. You cannot change at the same location. Okay, so yeah, appending is to add. Okay, cool. Let's go to loops. So as I said, loops is very indispensable part of programming. You can go over your set of or collection of elements and then perform tasks on each element corresponding to your algorithm. So over here I have a list of animals, and then for I just want to print that list. So I could have just done print animals, but I want to loop and then print. So then I would do for animal and animals, print animal. Okay. Again, this is the same thing you can do for using some inbuilt functions. Okay, now what are functions? Sometimes, like for modularity, we don't want to repeat certain code again and again. Let's say if I have if in my programming I have a necessity to find out whether a variable is true or false. So what I'll do, I'll every time I'll ask in the code, I'll run some code uh, looking whether it's true or false. So what I can do, I can just write that code once at one place in as a part of a function, and then call that function to determine whether the variable is true or false, or positive or negative. Like in this example, I want to know whether a variable is positive or negative. So what I do, I define a function with this syntax, and then I just go through a list, and then for each element, I find whether it's positive, negative, or zero. Now, if I didn't have the function, and if I required such a functionality many times in my code, I would have to rewrite this whole thing again and again and again. But a function just helps me reduce that redundancy. Okay. Uh, so there are many arguments you can pass to the function. There's a like for here, over here, if I want to print out a string hello and then name, then some people want to be greeted normally, some people want the greeting to be shouted at them. So then their name would be FRED caps lock. So if there are different things I can do with my functions. So let's say I give a parameter loud and I give it a default value. Loud equals to false mean if I do not give any value, consider loud as false. So then if my loud is true, then print hello, the name which I have provided, percentage as percentage name, but do the name in the uppercase. And if my loud is false, just print the name hello Bob. Okay, so there I just went over this very usual hello world type function. Now let's come to NumPy. Uh, NumPy basically is a it is a package library provided by Python, which helps you work with arrays, and it's used a lot in array gymnastics and all the different mathematical operations you want to perform. Uh, okay, before that, should I check chat? Let me check chat. Okay, so good. Let's like we had a list. An array is very similar to a list, and you have array as a list of numerals, and then you can access each element also by again that square bracket formalism which we saw earlier, and then we can change the value at each place also. Uh, you can define multi-dimensional arrays. So this array which you can see over here, let me execute this code. Oh, I didn't import NumPy. Okay, so first run this cell. You need to import NumPy, and then if you run this cell, yeah. So this is a multi-dimensional array. What do I mean by multi-dimensional array? If you see over here, this has 2 rows and 3 columns. So its size is 2,3. So we can have a one-dimensional array, which is either a row, just a row or a column, or we can have a matrix created like this, a 2,3 matrix, which is called a multi-dimensional array or a rank 2 array created like this. Then when we have created such an array, we can also ask what is the shape of the array. So it will give us 2 rows, 3 columns, and then we can ask for different elements also by referencing in this way. Okay, so there are many ways to create arrays in NumPy. There's a named np.zeros function, which will create a zero array with the dimensionality you have specified. There's a np.ones function, which will create a one array of all ones. There's a full, which will create an array of this dimension with the number you have provided, a constant array. np.I creates an identity matrix, very useful in quantum mechanics. And then you have a np.random, which creates the array with random variables. Okay, so array indexing is basically accessing the elements of an array. I would want to see. So if you want to create a rank 2 array of this form, you just specify it like this. And then you can also do slicing over here. Now, over here, the same way we had done slicing in list, you can do, this means that I want to access columns 1 and 2 and the first 2 rows, this slicing. So if you see, my whole array was this, array of rank 2 was this, first 2 rows and then column 1 and 3. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 1, 3, sorry, 2367, what columns 1 and 2, sorry. So 2367, this sub array I have sliced from my array using this slicing technique. Okay, a slice of an array is a view into the same data. Yeah, this is very important. If you modify a slice of the array, it will modify the array itself. So be very careful with that. Uh, you can have different types of slicing. You don't need to have continuous slicing. You can have various discontinuous slicing also. And yeah, by slicing, you can also change the rank of the sub array you are taking. So if you do a slice like this, the sub array which you create is a rank 1 sub array from a rank 2 parent array. Okay, so same thing can be done for column slicing also. And this is discontinuous slicing. Let me just go over this. Okay, so there's also, you can do Boolean array and indexing. You can go over the array and then you can see whether some condition, let's say I want which elements are greater than 2. So you can just go over the array and you can find, okay, these, the value stored over here are greater than 2 and the value stored over here are less than 2. So this is just this is called Boolean indexing. You can then perform operations using this indexing also. Okay, so let me go through this code. If I went too fast, I hope this will cover for it. np.zeros will create a zero array of size 100, dimension 100 comma 1, 100 comma nothing. So it's a rank 1 array, and that array I have stored in the variable name squares. Now for an iterator, this is just an iterator. I've chosen to name this iterator number. So for a number in range 0 to 99 with a spacing of 1. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till 99. This 1 gives the spacing of my range. So for a number varying from 0 to 99, calculate the squares of the number as the number exponentiated to the power 2 and then print the squares array. So you'll get something like this. So this gives you an idea of loops, arrays, and NumPy in the same code. Okay, so data types, again, array can have different types of data: float, int, in 32 and 64. 32, 64 is just the precision, float 64 is the precision of the float, like how much decimal point you want, and in 32 and 64 is the binary size of the location which is holding the integer value. Okay, very crudely I've given these definitions. Then this array math, I've noted it's self-read, you can read about it. It's basically array addition, matrix addition, matrix multiplication, and all those stuff. This broadcasting is also same thing. If you work, if you know about QMake, broadcasting helps you in these different inner products and outer products. Okay, so let me come to the plotting, and after the plotting, I see some messages are there in the chat, but let me come to that after the plotting. Plotting basically, sometimes the collection of data is used, and looking at it just in the form of a collection of numbers doesn't make a lot of sense. So what do we want to do? We want to plot that data, and matplotlib helps us to plot that data in Python. So you need to import that library as import matplotlib as PLT, and then let's say I want to plot sin x versus x. So what you'll do, you'll just create a x range from 0 to 3 pi with a spacing of 0.1. So 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 all the way up to 3 pi, and then you will create another array y, which will be the sign of the x's stored, x value stored in the x array. So that y is the sign of x, and then that is the y of x, f of x, the function which we want to plot. And then you can do plt.plot x comma y, and you can see a nice sine curve you can observe. Over here, the pi value is not mentioned, it's mentioned in the integer format, but over here you can assume 3 into 3.149 point some 9.3, so it must end over here. So very good. You can see the sine curve, but this is again, there is a lot of, not a lot of information. What have I plotted? What does this axis mean? What does that axis mean? So all this you have to add, and that is what is X label, Y label, title. This is very similar to Excel. If you have worked in Excel, there's legend you provide the title, you provide the X label, Y label. So all this you can provide, and then you have a more meaningful graph where you have a title, you have a label, and then you know, okay, what's happening over here. Okay, you can also plot two plots in the same plot, which is called subplot. You just need to use this subplot construct, and then you'll have this. And this helps in simultaneously looking at two functions. How do they vary over the same range? These are different functionalities we use. And if I get time in the hands-on exercise, I wanted to go through these exercises. So let's see if after my Julia tutorial I get time. But yeah, basically you can try these three exercises. It should be very simple, fairly simple. The first two at least, the third one will be quite a task. So what I'll do today, as it seems we are running out of time, I won't go over, if I don't get to go over these exercises, I will post the solution to this again on the GitHub link which I have provided. So after 2-3 days, you can go to that link and you can see if the solutions are present over there, and you can match it with the solutions which you come up the exercises yourself. Maybe you come up with a better solution, so you can just give me a pull request or just share the code with me also. Okay, so now I finished the Python tutorial. It's a very big language. Trying to complete it in 1 hour, it's quite a task. So I hope there's some justice. Oh, the voice was lagging. I hope it's not lagging now.
No, it's not.
Okay, so let me go with some questions apart from Mari's. Yeah, NumPy is Samek answered it. Okay, if I plot a straight line, can I get the slope for it? So by viewing it, I don't know. Like by viewing it, if you want a slope, you might get to know whether it's less than one or more than one. But mostly, you need to find out the slope through numerical calculations. The plot itself won't give you the slope. You can always there are functions, there are fitting functions which you can provide to your set of data, and that fitting function will give you the slope very nicely. Or full width half maximum of a bell-shaped distribution. Again, no, like not from the plot, I guess. But again, you can run. So you're plotting the graphs from a data, from a set of data. You can run some codes on that set of data to get the FWHM or the slope. Interactive plots, I can understand what you're saying. Like interactive plots, I don't know if Matplotlib offers that interactive feature. Sorry for that. I can search and tell you later. Okay, so let me go over to the Julia tutorial now. Okay, so Julia tutorial, I'll take it rather slow, and it is not a basic tutorial where I'll go over, okay, what is the syntax. Like in Python, I went over the syntax, albeit very quickly, but in Julia, I won't go over the syntax. Rather, I'll go over a problem, which is the problem of solving the 1D wave equation. And while going through the problem, we will discover the Julia syntax. Okay, so the wave equation is a very important second order linear partial differential equation. I use indispensably in physics. Sorry for the trip of tongue. And how is it represented? Let's say I have a function u, which is a function of a set of spatial coordinates and a time coordinate. And for our simplicity, we'll just keep one spatial coordinate. We'll ditch all this. So we are talking about one-dimensional wave equation. So the one-dimensional wave equation is given by this nice partial differential equation where the second derivative of function u is equals to some parameter c square, some coefficient c square, into the second derivative of the function u with respect to space. This is the wave equation, often represented by box U, and you can just look up any optics or any waves physics textbook to get to this equation. I think 11, 12 we do discover this equation. Yeah. So let's come to this. I hope those who had Julia running ran these two cells, and I'll just wait and just see the chat for 1 minute. Uh, Tanushri, you will have the Julia kernel when you add iJulia in your Anaconda bash. So let me go to this to the workshop. If you go to the workshop, I don't remember the command. Go to this link. Hey, the Julia tutorial link vanished from here.
No, refresh it. Refresh the page.
Oh, nice. Okay, so if you go to this link, oh, are you saying you downloaded iJulia? Wait, let me check chat. Yes, you don't have iJulia, that's why. So how do you install it? You do using package.add iJulia. So you can just go to your Conda prompt and do package.iJulia, or you can just use your Julia prompt also. So in Conda prompt, I think you might need another Conda add Julia, some other command. But over here, this is the command what you do in your Julia prompt. So when you download Julia, you'll have a Julia bash, and in that terminal, sorry, Julia terminal, and in that Julia terminal, you type these two commands, you'll have iJulia downloaded. So in terminal, but after opening Julia, so with the Ubuntu terminal, you need to you can type using package, run it, then do package.add iJulia. It should work then. Okay, so I think most of you do not have that iJulia installed. So just let me go through this. Yes, Tanushri, these commands will run in Ubuntu, but you need to access Julia in Ubuntu. So it's been long I accessed Julia in Ubuntu, but what used to happen is I just used to go to my Julia source folder and then just run the command Julia, and then I used to get Julia prompt. And if you want to access the Julia prompt from anywhere in Ubuntu, you need to make changes in your bash RC file. So all these things, I don't remember the commands right now, but I can share the file later with you all. But basically you need to open your Julia prompt in Ubuntu. Okay, so just let me go back to the tutorial, and it's a fairly theoretical tutorial, so just follow for now, and you can run it later. Since I'm running it, it obviously runs, so no tension about that. Let's just focus on the theory over here, which is very important. Wave equation is used a lot of times in physics, and since this is the astrophysics workshop, I hope people are interested in physics also. Even in astrophysics, it's used, so let's go over it. So these two so Samik, if you're on Ubuntu tutorial, first access Julia. First, Mac. Mac again also, if you downloaded Julia, if you downloaded it, then you would have a Julia terminal downloaded, and that you have to open the Julia terminal. Okay, Samik, so you can do one thing, you can just mail me, I'll put my mail ID later, and then we can go over how you can access iJulia. Let me just continue with this. tutorial. Okay, so these are some packages we imported. Packages are basically libraries which makes our life easier. So this is a partial differential equation. So that you can see most of our packages: differential equation, linear algebra. PyPlot is for plotting our the results which we'll obtain. Some special functions we'll be using, so that will special functions like exponential, sine function, all these, the different special functions, tan or error function inverse, all these functions which we use are present in a special library, special functions, and plots again. So Julia provides a plotting library, plots, and you can also export matplotlib from Python into Julia using PyPlot. So this is this is one of the parts of the multi-paradigm somebody was asking. So yeah, there are other parts to it also, but PyPlot is basically matplotlib exported from Python to Julia. Now, now you have imported the packages, but then you have to tell Julia which packages you will be using currently. And that is why you need to specify, okay, I'll be using all these packages, and also I'll be using statistics, which also helps us in certain statistical analysis. I don't think in this tutorial we'll be doing some statistical analysis, so this can be ignored for now. Okay, so how do we solve this wave equation? This is a continuous equation. This is a function u of x comma t, u of x comma t, a continuous function. When you are numerically simulating or solving something, you cannot do it continuously. You have to discretize those functions and discretize your space and your time wherever you're doing your simulation. So mostly when do we resort to numerical simulations or numerical exercises is when analytically doing that task is very difficult. And what do we mean by analytically? Using that continuous function, using that u of x, as a function of x comma t, solving it is pretty difficult. So how can we solve it? I can just discretize my space. What do I mean by discretize? Let's say my x varies continuously from 0 to 1. Now, solving the wave equation in this continuous format is difficult. So what I'll do, I'll discretize it. X varies from 0 to 1, but in intervals of 0.1. So 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 till 1. This is called discretization of space. And now what it does is, it gives you finite number of variables to handle. First, when it was continuous, there were the infinite number of variables which you could have plotted. 0.1, 0.01, 0.00, 1.0, some infinite number of variables. But now when you have made it a finite discretized space, now it helps you in doing your numerical functions and numerical tasks easily, because now there's a finite number of variables you want to manipulate. Now, what do I mean by that finite number of variables? Let's say I have discretized my space from x equals to 0 to some x equals to xn in the intervals of dx. So 0, dx, 2 dx, 3 dx, 4 dx, all the way to up till n minus 1 dx, n minus 1 into dx. Now, this u of x, we can consider it as a displacement. Let's say I have a string stretched from x0 till xn. Okay. Now that string, now I displace it from its mean position. Let that mean position be displacement equals to 0. So I displace it from its mean position. Now each point on the string will have a certain displacement from the mean position. And if I were to consider each point, I'll have infinite points. But I won't consider each point. I'll consider n points, which I have specified over here. And those n points have a certain spacing. That spacing is given by dx. Now those n points will have certain displacement. And I denote each point's displacement as, let's say the first point as u1, the second point's displacement as u2, and so on and so forth. So the general ith point's displacement is given by ui, and this double derivative of ui, this is the first principal definition of a derivative. that a double derivative of ui is u of I minus 1 plus u of I plus 1 minus 2 of ui by the interval square. This is the first principles definition of derivative. We define our derivatives in this way when we do it in 11 and 12. So you can see if my space was not discretized, this I minus 1 could have been any point beside I, and we could have infinite number of such points beside both I minus 1 and I plus 1. But now when I have discretized my space, I know I minus 1 is a point dx distance to the left of I, and I plus 1 is a point dx distance to the right of I. Now, now this formalism, now you'd ask if my u was 1, what is 1 minus 1? U0. I have not defined u0. So this is precisely the problem of defining boundary conditions. Okay, the same thing happens for n. What is n plus 1? I have not defined n plus 1. So if I take my u1 as un plus 1 and u0 as n, basically I have taken the 2 points of the string and connected both of them. So I have made the string a circle basically, and that is called periodic boundary condition. And if I would have done no, both the points are fixed, they are not moving, they won't move ever in time, then it would have been Dirichlet boundary condition. I don't know the proper pronunciation, sorry for that. But that would be both of them have zero displacement at all times, and the derivatives are also zero. Okay. Now, to do this derivative, to find out the second order derivative, I could have easily looped over u. I could have taken a iterative parameter I, and then I could have loop over u. Rather than that, I'll do a more compact thing and I'll form a derivative matrix. This matrix, if you see this is a particular second order derivative matrix, and these are the displacement of each of the points. Now, when I multiply this to this, you'll see exactly this thing emerging. Let's check it. Let's check for the third row. If I multiply this third row to this vector, column vector, what I'll get is 1 into u2 minus 2 into u3, 1 into u4 by dx square. Now I've taken, in this tutorial, I've taken dx is equals to 1. So by dx square is basically by 1. So I just need to focus on the numerator. So right now I have for the third row, u1 minus, so u2 minus 2u3 plus u4 is equals to d2u3 dx2. Let's check with this formula. If I put I equals to 3, d2u3 dx2 is u2 plus u4 minus 2u3 by 1. So for any I, this derivative will give me this matrix will give me the second order derivative of that ui. So this is a very compact way of taking derivatives. Rather than looping, you just do the matrix operations, and it is a more robust, also more efficient, also numerically. Okay, now now all this was explanation. Okay, this was not code. Now I need to code this derivative operator. So while coding, we can learn about the syntax of Julia also. You see, I have put dx equals to 1. Again, I don't need to specify whether it's an integer, float, or anything. Julia assumes the type. This is how assignment is done in Julia. If you want to form matrices in Julia, again, you can use the NumPy notation zeros and give the dimension, and you'll form the matrix. If you want to loop in Julia, you can use the for loop. The notation changes a little, wherein you had range over here, but in Julia you can do 1 is to n plus 1, which basically means go from 1 to n plus 1 in the steps of 1. If I need to specify my steps, what I'll do 0.1 this. So now it will go from 1 to n plus 1 in steps of 0.1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, so on and so forth to n plus 1. But no, I wanted to go to 1 to n plus 1 in steps of 1. So I specify it like this. Now it is telling me whenever I and j, the absolute value of this subtraction is less than 1. So what does that mean? It means that I minus j is either 1, minus 1, or 0. In that case, what I'll do, I'll increase the value of that location that ij location in my del 2 matrix by 1. And whenever I and j are equal, I'll decrease my value of that ij location by 3. And what will that give me? It will give me precisely the matrix which I had shown over here, this matrix. Okay, so this seems like a good point to ask if there are any questions. Exactly, Sam. This is one dimensional, so we can obviously decouple both the space partial derivatives. Sorry, we just have one spatial partial derivative, but also in the case of two dimensions, if both the space dimension decouples, then we can use the similar formulation, or you can add extra total derivative terms, which are there usually in partial derivatives. So that you can, or chain rule terms, which are there in the partial derivative, but over here there is no chain rule term. So yeah, we can do this for, we can use the principal definition of derivatives. Exactly, we have an decoupled equation. Yes. Okay. Okay. So the question is answered. Okay, let me go ahead. You all could just tell me in the chat if the pace is too fast, because I know this is an advanced tutorial and I want to go over the concepts nicely. So if somebody wants me to go slower, there's a, a tool in Zoom, as far as I remember, which says go slow. Okay, a little bit slow would help. Fine, fine. Okay, so then you would have to bear for me a little more than the stipulated time, because I just have 5 minutes left and a lot of things to cover. So I'll try to go slow. Okay, so now we have formed this derivative matrix. Let me go just give a quick recap. We have a string from x equals to 0 to x equals to xn, where xn has certain value, and that string is following periodic boundary conditions wherein both the ends of the strings are tied to each other. Now that string has a mean position, and we are displacing that string from its mean position, and that displacement is captured by a function u of x. Now that u of x has certain values at the defined lattice points, which are given by u1, u2, u3, and we want to find out the double derivative of those values with respect to my position space, and that for that I'm using this derivative matrix. Now we had a double derivative in time also. If you go back to this equation, we had a double derivative in time. We treated the double derivative in space, but what about double derivative in time? That we'll treat by something, by reducing the order of equations in terms of time. What we'll do, we'll convert this second order derivative equation in terms of time into two first order derivative equations in terms of time. How do we do that? We just take delta u by delta t as some random function v of x comma t, and then delta v by delta t. What is delta v by delta t? Delta square u by delta t square. So delta v by delta t as c square del square u by del x square. Very easily we have formed two coupled first order equations. Okay, so now we have two arrays, u array and v array. U is the original displacement array, which I want to know what is the displacement of each point of string in further instances of time. That is what is the meaning of solving the wave equation. If I have solved the wave equation, it means that at t equals to 0, when I displaced my string from its mean position, I want to see how it propagates in time. How does that displacement propagates in time? What are the different positions of the different elements as a function of time if the string follows the wave equation, if there's a wave propagating with certain speed c. So what we do is we store the displacement in the displacement array, which is the u of x, and we also store the first derivative of the displacement. How fast the displacement is changing as a function of space in v of x, that is as a function of time in this v of x array. So I have two arrays, u array and v array. U array is the displacement array, v array is the first order time derivative of the displacement array. We don't, this doesn't matter much to us. It is just a intermediate step in the numerical computation. We want to see what is u of x and what is its value as a function of time. So whenever we have a differential equation system or a system which follows a certain differential equation, we need to provide what differential equation it follows, what are the boundary conditions, and we also need to provide what are the initial conditions. What was the initial configuration of the system? And that is a huge Herculean task, because in different places, even if you go to numerical relativity, which is valid for this astrophysics, finding out the initial configuration is also a very big task. Again, if you come to the Bose-Einstein condensates, which I was working on, finding the initial condition is a very big task. So that is for some fields, that is a project in itself. Okay, find the initial configuration of the system. So this initial configuration plus the differential equation plus the boundary conditions it's following, that gives us a whole system which I can integrate and know what is its condition or what is its state in future time. So I provided you the differential equation. I told we'll be following periodic boundary condition. Now the only thing that is left is the initial condition. And for the initial condition, what I'll take is, I'll take a certain u of x function, which will give me u of x at time 0, and certain v of x function, which is v of x at time 0. And I am imposing this initial condition. How am I imposing it? I'll just take my string, which is at mean displacement, and I'll give it a certain initial, when I displace it from the mean position, I'll give it a certain profile, which will be my u of x. And v of x, I'll generally keep 0. So initially, there is no tendency to change in time, but later there's a tendency to change in time. Okay, so let me code this differential equation in the form of a function. So what does that function do? It will take my a matrix which contains both the u array and the v array concatenated as one. It will take a certain set of parameters. It will take what time it is in our evolution. When we do numerical simulations, we evolve our system, right? We evolve from t equals to 0 to certain t. So the function takes a t parameter to know what time the system is at and what further time the system has to go to, and outputs the values in du. Now this is a special function. This is a special function which is required by the differential equation solver, which I'll be using below. That is why the du goes in as a predefined matrix. But generally in functions, what we do is we calculate the return value and then just return it. But over here we are returning nothing, because this function automatically takes du and outputs it. It's a special function. So let's not go into how it does that, what is the mechanism behind it, but the general gist is it will take a set of a u array and a v array. That u array and a v array is for a certain time instant. It will take certain parameters, which is the speed of the wave, and a buffer which stores some intermediate value. This buffer is just there to store intermediate values. It has no importance at whatsoever. And what is the time of the system in the evolution? And then over here, I've just coded the partial differential equation which I had shown over here. Let's see, du delta u delta t is v. So basically du of the first variable is my u, is the second variable. Fine, that is what we had. And du of the second variable is c square, second derivative in space. And the second derivative in space I'm calculating using this Mull method, which takes the second order derivative matrix, multiplies it to my U array, and then outputs it to the buffer array. That buffer array is just to store the intermediate value. And then I'll take that buffer value, multiply it to the C square, and then I'll know what is my derivative of V. Okay, so this function codes my uh, differential equation. So now I have coded differential equation. My periodic boundary conditions are coded by this del2 matrix, the derivative matrix. Now we need to define the initial condition. That is the third thing which is left. So, excuse me, the initial condition which I am putting is the displacement array has a sign profile, sign of x profile, and the v array, which is the time derivative of the displacement array, is 0 altogether. That is the initial condition I'll be putting. So this is a normal function. You can see it just takes a value, some parameters n and dx. It forms a matrix which has the u array and the v array, and then it iterates over that matrix to fill in the array. So the u array, which is the first array in the matrix, it's a rank 2 matrix with 2 columns. The first column is the u array and the second column is the v array. So it takes the first array and then it provides the sign profile. Okay, so this initial condition I have provided. I'll run the dynamics, and how do the dynamics look like? Let's begin. So this, after this I'll see if there is any questions in the chat. So this @time begin end, this is a construct which helps me to know how much time my code takes to run. So this is a fairly simple equation. If I take a very complicated equation with a lot of dimensions and a lot of variables to store, sometimes it takes a lot of time to run. And it's good to know how much time it took, so that when you do some variations, you know that, okay, doing this variation, my time taken will reduce. Sometimes you just run the code and then go have dinner or lunch or anything. And then when you come back, you want to know, okay, how much time it took. So that is what is shown by this time begin end. And as you see, when I ran the code, it took 1.6 seconds, very less time. Okay, so I have taken 500 points in space from 0 to the 500th point. The distance between each point, each lattice point is 1. So I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 500. My value of the speed of the wave is 10. Now there's one thing, CFL condition, which you should know. Whenever you are solving a wave equation, this CFL condition should be satisfied, wherein the time step by the space step should follow this condition. So the u is the c, which I had shown earlier. So my c I have taken 10. My delta t, if I go back, my delta t was 0.01, and delta x, the dx is 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 100. So dx is 1, 10 into delta t 0.01. So I have 0.1. 0.1 should be less than equals to Cmax, and Cmax typically can be taken as 1. So what we want is, we want this fraction to be always less than 1 for our simulations to make sense. Now you will ask me, why is this condition? Go through this Wikipedia page, you will get to know. There's a lot of derivation behind this, but it generally makes sense to step slowly in time rather than very quickly in time. And that also comes from special relativity, where nothing can move faster than light. So if you move very quickly in time, what you will have is the neighboring positions won't be able to affect the position in check. Okay, so this is some very advanced stuff I'm going into. I didn't want to go into. We can just take this as a given condition that, okay, this inequality needs to be followed. And in our simulations, we are following that because we have 10 into 0.01 by 1 less than equals to 1. That is followed. Okay, so that is one detour I took. Let's come back. The initial condition I showed, and let's run the dynamics. Okay, before running the dynamics, see, I've taken the speed as 10. Now, solving is very simple in Julia. Solving the differential equation, you just use this one line function, which is given by the differential equation package, which I got you imported earlier. And then you set up the problem using this and solve using this. So this setting up the problem says, take this set of differential equations, which is denoted by f function, take the initial condition denoted by this function, run it from time 0 to 10 in the steps of, run it from time 0 to 10, I'll tell the steps later. And then this f function had some parameter values which needed to be passed. So those parameters values are c and 0. Remember, in our function, we had this p which had c and buffer. So now I need to give it the c and buffer. So specify the parameter value over here. Then after setting up the problem, solve the problem using the RK4 method, a special version of the RK4 method with time steps 0.01. So now there are different classes of problems. Stiff problems are also there. So you can solve stiff problems using this notation. You can also use some other solver rather than RK solver. You can use this solver and you can change the DT, the time step also. The lesser time step you take, the better. But it also makes your computation more expensive and more time consuming. Okay, so I have run this already. Now, before I come to plotting, just let me check if there is any, have I made you all mad? Okay, so what is no, yes. Okay, so nobody is facing, most of the people are not facing the audio lag. So I guess it is your individual internet connection then. Okay, so any questions still here? Are you completely lost? Have you forgotten everything? Yes, RK4 is Ranchkata, fourth order. Yes, 4-5. RK4. So if you have not understood anything till now, just watch the good plots which I'll show next, and then you can go over the syntax and the explanation. I've tried to explain as much as possible in the tutorial file. You can go over this video recording also later, and obviously you can mail me also. Disclaimer, I won't if I do not respond to the mail like immediately, don't get disheartened. I will get to it eventually. Is Julia preferred over MATLAB? I prefer Julia over MATLAB because I prefer Jupyter type interface or a workbook. Like in Mathematica, you have a workbook type interface where I execute codes, write the code and execute it independently. You have the same interface in MATLAB also, but you just you can either do the script thing or you can do that interface thing. And in that interface thing, you cannot write the whole code and then execute it separately. You just need to type it one by one and then do it. So just for that reason, I prefer Julia. I don't know if MATLAB offers good libraries for differential equation solver. I've never used differential equation solvers in MATLAB, but mostly if you want to do matrix multiplication and matrix operations, which I've done a lot in MATLAB, then I always prefer MATLAB. But right now, Julia is my favorite. I don't know, because it's very easy to code in Julia and it's very user friendly also. There's a very active community. Okay, yeah, there is ODU 4.5. Yes, there is ODU 4.5. But I don't know if it is fairly simple. Can you do multi-dimensional, multi-variable differential equation solving using ODE 4.5? I have no idea. So yeah, you can check MATLAB also. But Julia has a very active community engagement. People answer your queries also if you have some queries on the Julia platform online. So yeah, and it's quite fast also. I don't know how it compares with MATLAB, but generally it is said it is one of the best languages for scientific numerical programming. Okay, so let me go now. Now when we have plotted it, so Saurabh writes, there's this technical problem I'm facing while using my default kernel. So Saurabh, you have to install iJulia. Have you installed iJulia? If you have installed iJulia and it's not working, then it's a problem. Or else install iJulia and then you can go, then you can see uh, the kernel, Julia kernel option will be there. Okay, so now we need to plot, and we'll see how plotting works in Julia. So I'll use both. I'll use Julia's inbuilt plots library, and also I'll use the matplotlib imported as pyplot. So first let's use pyplot because that we saw earlier. So what happens over here after I have solved the sol variable? It's a nasty variable. It stores the time array, which contains the value of time, that is 0, 0 0.01, 0 0.02, 0.03 and all that. And it contains the U array. That U array stores the displacement and the time derivative of the displacement at each position and at each time instance. So how you can access that? If you do sol.t, you'll get the time array. If you do the sol.u, you get the position and the time derivative array. So let's say I define a array x1 which will contain my time array, and I define a matrix y1 which will store the displacement of 1 point in the whole lattice. The lattice had 500 points. If you remember, my n was 500. Now I focus on just 1 point. I just want to see how that point oscillated as the wave progressed in time. So what I'll do, I'll take the sol, the solution, the sol variable, give it the time instant. Now this IT gives the index of the time array I want to access. If you directly want to access 0th time, what you will do is you'll just do, sorry, or the time that is 5 units, just do 5. But remember, sol round brackets 5 and square brackets 5 is different. Sol square brackets 5 is 0.05 and it's 0.05 in time. And sol round brackets 5 is actually the time 5 units. So this is just some trivia, but let me keep the code intact. And at all time instants, because my IT is looping from 1 to the length, this should be sol t, sorry. So my IT is looping from 1 to all the time instants, and at all time instance, give me, this will not be, sorry, 158. 158. Give me the value of my displacement. My displacement is captured by the first array of the 150th position. Okay, I store it over here, and then I plot using this plt.plot function. Give the two axes, specify the color, the line width, then give the title, label, and then show the plot. Okay, let me run. So as you can see, this is the displacement. It starts from a value near about 1, and then it gradually decreases. This is the motion of the point x equals to 150 as a function of time, the displacement. Now you say that what use is this plot? I agree, it might not be useful now, but if you have an exact solution and you want to match it to the numerical solution, this helps. Let's go to some better visualizations, and that is this. You want to observe how this thing, the string, how does that string looks at different time instance. So this is what I have done. This is not a contour plot. I'm so sorry for the naming. This is a wireframe plot, waveform plot. So what this does is you collect the displacement at, now like let's say I focus over here. This is the displacement at a certain x value and a certain time value. The time value may be around 4 seconds and the x value may be around 200. So what I need to do, I need to create an array, which is the u value array, which is a rank 2 array, which will store for all time instance and for all points the displacement value. And then I create a time array and x-axis array and then just store the values and then use plot surface command. Now over here, this is not pyplot. This is the plots of Julia. So plots of Julia gives us this plot surface command, and then let me just specify it. Using plots in Julia. Plots provided by Julia. So we get this beautiful representation. Okay, this is how my wave progresses as time progresses. You can also use the plot surface command. Oh, sorry, that was wait a minute. I'm so sorry. This was the pyplot one. I get confused. This was pyplot. Now this is what this one is plots. You can see using plots is written, and when you use plots, you specify the labels inside this command itself, plots.surface, and then you specify the labels and title inside. So there's just a difference in syntax, not much rocket science over here. It will give you the similar thing, albeit in a more beautiful format. And you can also have a contour plot. You can use this contour command and you can see the contour plot. Sometimes viewing the contour plot gives us a lot of information about the system. Like over here, you can see this is one contour line which is not changing. So you know around 250, that position is not getting displaced a lot. Let me just check that. Let me go over here and put it as 250. So you can see from 0.012 to 0.004, very minimal displacement. To put in perspective, my previous displacement was for, like, let's say for the 150th point was from 0.9 to 0.3. So orders of magnitude difference. So the contour plot gives us the information, okay, which along the lines of the contour, the value remains almost similar. So along which line the value is remaining similar, that is given by contour plots. And yeah, this is also a very good way to visualize the system. It's basically you have taken this plot and then taken its shadow on the 2D surface. That is a contour plot. Okay, fine. So that is the end of the Julia tutorial. This was, I understand this was a very advanced, not a very advanced tutorial, but fairly advanced tutorial. And if you have any questions about the Julia syntax, as far as I can answer, I'll try to answer, or else I'll defer it to the later communication we might have. And yeah, if you have any questions about the Julia tutorial, I can address them now. And I think this has gone over long enough. 2 hours is a long time. So I won't want to do the hands-on session myself now. Could you tell how to do that installation of IDEA? So if you go to that, this thing, the Mini Astro workshop, oh, okay, somebody did, wow, who is it? Let me thank you. Yeah, Divyanshu, thank you so much for this. You can follow this very nice set of instructions Divyanshu has given. Yeah, so I think that answers your question. Any other questions? Let me change my, 1 second. So I think there are no questions. So I think, Surinder, we can stop the recording.